To be or not to be? That is the question. Siobhan McHale, author, influencer, and change leader, has the answer. To be the best humanity can be, we should be more like bees. How can that be? The hive mind is key. Embracing this bee-like way of being can help us solve the biggest challenges we face as humans. We'll be a lot better off if we can learn to follow the lens model of bee behavior. Look beyond current circumstances, experiment with changes on a small scale, nudge the system towards change, and strengthen the emerging change. Siobhan does such a brilliant job explaining how this framework elevates our group intelligence, GQ, the newest form of observable intelligence that can help us transcend the seemingly impossible. It's helped the bees pull off one of the world's most amazing comeback stories, adding more than 1 million colonies in the US alone from 2017 through 2022. Imagine what it can do for us. All right, Siobhan McHale, welcome to the DesuckifyWork Podcast.
I'm so delighted to be here, TJ, with you today.
I am delighted that you are here. I think you are exploring some stuff that we need more of in the world. So before we dive into that, I'd love to give you a chance to kind of describe a little bit of what you're doing in the world right now, and maybe even a bit about how you came to be doing it.
Yeah, so my passion is helping people to navigate change in workplaces and lead better change for better outcomes and better places for everyone to work, essentially. Mm-hmm. And I was born in Ireland and really was fascinated by bees as they swarmed in the orchard of my family's farm, TJ. And this fascination with natural ecosystems led me to study complex human ecosystems or groups. So I've spent my career really being fascinated and doing a lot of research in how groups operate.
Well, I think we'll definitely get into that bee metaphor in a bit, because I think that's a really fascinating thing, and I know you go into that in some good detail in your new book and lots of places, and I think it is a fascinating way of thinking about human interaction and collaboration, and in a way that feels like, well, yeah, this is nature emerging in us, which I think is a wonderful way of bringing it to life. Before we go too deep with that, I always like to ask, what role does work play in your life personally?
Yeah, I see myself in two key roles. I'm the head of HR at Dulux Group, which is an international paints company. And I'm also very passionate about my role as an educator, which goes beyond my sort of formal job. And it's really about passing on what I've learned as what I call an insider. So I've been an insider in organizations, the person or the executive responsible for making change happen. And that's really the perspective I bring to my work. There's lots of people who are writing, external consultants or academics who are writing great stuff on change, but the perspective I bring in my role as an educator is that insider lens. When you're in an organization, how does it work on the ground? So they're very blended for me, TJ. It's not a hard boundary.
Well, I want to explore that a little bit, the idea of being more of an insider, because I think you can hear both voices from people. Some people will say, oh, you need the outside perspective. But I think as somebody who is currently sort of sitting on the outside, I appreciate the perspective I bring, but there are moments where it's like, ooh, what's going on in here? Like, do I really know? And you have to dig a little differently. So for you, what are you noticing as the benefit of having that insider perspective?
Yeah, I think one of the benefits for me, and I talk about this in the book, The Hive Mind at Work, is really sometimes busting some of the myths that I was taught as a consultant. So I've been able to go into organizations and sort of go, wow, that really doesn't work
Yeah.
on the inside. It's not exactly like that when you're working in an organization. So yeah, it's really allowed me to walk up to and question some of those deeply held assumptions that we have about change management.
I can imagine that. I think the theoretical bumps up against reality fairly frequently.
Yes.
Since this is the Desuckify Work podcast, I also would love to know for you, it sounds like you're doing work that you truly love. Was there a moment in your career or at any point where you felt that work kind of sucked for you?
Yeah, it was more that it wasn't really on purpose. It wasn't aligned with my North Star. And I was standing in a taxi rank in Chicago in the freezing weather with the wind blowing off Lake Michigan. And I was working at Accenture at the time, and I'd spent a decade as a management consultant. And I really sort of hit a wall and thought, I'm sort of done with flying in and out of organizations and advising them. I've reached a point where I actually wanted to roll my sleeves up and make change happen within organizations. So that was really a turning point for me, and the point where I joined an organization as the executive in charge of change. And that's really been the second half of my career at TJ. So that was really when it just wasn't meeting my sense of purpose, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's a big one for a lot of folks right now. I mean, I think COVID really unlocked a lot of that for people, so those of us who maybe experienced it beforehand were suddenly joined by lots of folks who were like, oh wait, so this is my life. this
Yeah.
is every day for me pretty much. Maybe I can have more choice in what I actually spend my time doing every day and make sure that it does connect to something that matters to me. I imagine you encountered that in a different way in your work because you're dealing with teams and organizations. And do you notice working with larger groups that is there ever conflict between what you notice some of the individuals feeling or wanting in terms of their purpose and then the purpose of the team, of the hive?
Mm. Yeah, so one of the things I talk about in the hive mind at work is the need for leaders and managers at all levels to understand what I call the 9 laws of group dynamics. And often we're trying to bring about change without fundamentally understanding how groups operate. And one of those 9 laws is the law of multiple perspectives. And if you don't tap into those multiple perspectives, you can often be derailed during your change because that perspective will raise itself and become what people call resistance often. So you've got to tap into the multiple perspectives and understand what is going on uniquely in that ecosystem.
So there's 9 laws. Are these laws related to what you observed in bees, or is this something different?
Yeah, they also relate to bees, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So they
That's
are
wild.
common across all systems, these 9 laws. And what is interesting in ecosystems, natural ecosystems and human ecosystems, is that they often look complex, but underneath this complexity, paradoxically, are simple laws or patterns. And if you understand these laws or patterns as a leader, then you can navigate in complexity and you can bring about change much more easily.
Well, that makes me wonder because I have at times felt that complexity, and I wonder, so how do I get better at detecting those patterns or even knowing what they are?
Yeah, so that's an intelligence. So what I'm talking about now is a shift from IQ and EQ to GQ. So let me just explain those 3.
Okay.
So IQ is intellectual intelligence, which is the ability to think critically, to solve technical problems. So that
Hmm.
logic, that reasoning, very, very important skill set or
Hmm.
intelligence.
Yeah.
The second intelligence that we all know about is EQ or emotional intelligence, a lot of it
Hmm.
coming from the work of Daniel Goleman. So understanding your own emotions and understanding the emotions of others, another
Hmm.
critical intelligence. But
Yeah.
the third intelligence is really about groups. How do
Mm.
groups operate? And how do you understand groups, understand their dynamics, and intervene in groups in order to help them to deliver, grow, and adapt?
Mm.
So, this intelligence is really about firstly understanding patterns and hidden rules in groups. And then, secondly, designing interventions that can bring about change. And then, thirdly, implementing them in a way that actually works. So,
Mm.
it's not an intelligence that we've really been taught to develop.
I mean, it doesn't seem like it. I mean, I think about all my years working in groups. I mean, I'm sure I observed patterns, even if I wasn't thinking of it that way. I'm sure I noticed things, but I think I also noticed that it was a great source of personal and collective frustration at times that things didn't work the way you thought they might or wanted them to when you're working with teams. And I I wonder what are some of the patterns that we're not seeing that we should be able to see.
Yes, so I'll give you a practical example. When I was working for the ANZ Bank in
Mm-hmm.
Australia, New Zealand, headquartered in Melbourne, we actually, over 7 years, we turned around the bank from the worst performing bank in the country to the highest performing bank in the
Mm.
country and the number one bank on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index.
Wow.
A major transformation, but things weren't always that way. When I walked into the bank, the executives were at a loss.
Mm.
They had restructured, and actually, the restructure had taken the bank backwards. I'm sure you've seen that a lot in organizations.
For sure.
You
Yeah.
restructure and you
Yes.
think, oh, things are even worse, and people are
Mm-hmm.
more depressed, and it hasn't helped at all.
Yeah.
So what we began to see was that the executives were not looking for the underlying pattern that was running the bank. So
Mm-hmm.
we did some analysis, went in with a systemic lens, and discovered what we call the order taker pattern.
Mm.
So the order taker pattern was where head office was in the role of order giver. So
Mm-hmm.
they were giving the instructions and demanding things from the bank branches. The
Mm-hmm.
700 bank branches were
Mm.
in role of order taker.
Mm.
So their role, they had virtually stepped into role of victims, just
Mm-hmm.
waiting for the instruction.
Wow.
And this pattern of head office gives the orders and the branches take the orders was running the bank and leading to ultimately to very poor outcomes, poor customer satisfaction, a disengaged and de-energized workforce who just waited to be told what to do.
Mm.
So seeing that pattern actually unlocked a whole lot of a whole lot of change because we started to rewire the bank to shift the pattern.
So you notice the pattern, and I presume in that work at some point you get people to also notice the pattern and agree
Yes.
this is the pattern we are currently living in. Um, in that case, it sounds like, okay, I'm noticing this pattern. I'm noticing also that I want us to be a better company. So I'm open to new patterns. So is
Yes.
that part of the work there then creating new patterns that are more in line with what they say they want to do or who they want to be?
Yes, a big part of the work. The first
Mm-hmm.
part of the work is seeing the reality. So
Mm-hmm.
you need to be able to actually diagnose what's actually going on.
Mm-hmm.
The second part of the work is designing. You need to design an intervention that can rewire that pattern and reshape how the organization is functioning. And then the
Mm-hmm.
third part is to implement that design without raising resistance, and how do you navigate when you do encounter obstacles? So those
Mhm.
three parts of the change were all really important, TJ.
And I'm wondering, I'm sitting here thinking about the world I come from, which is advertising, ad agencies, and there's plenty of patterns for sure lurking in all those agencies. And I've worked in
Mm,
some where I think the order taker pattern is there, but there's others where I'm not sure I could decipher the pattern, but you feel its effects and its pull. Um, so
yes.
I'm curious that diagnosis
Mm.
stage. What are you doing in that stage, and how are you helping the executives of any of these companies to notice it with you and then be open
Yes.
to changing it?
That's a critical skill, and you really need to have a systemic lens. So, what I mean by that, and one of the things that can help leaders most is to what I call in the book map the ecosystem, map the organization or its
Mm-hmm.
connectedness with other parts. So,
Yeah.
what you're trying to do is make what you've been subject to, because if you're a subject, if you're in it,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to see it. It's a bit like a family. You know, when
Mm-hmm.
you're in a family, you can't really see the dysfunction in your family, but then you partner with somebody else, maybe your wife or
Mm-hmm.
your spouse, your partner, and they come and visit your house or your
Yeah.
home. And they say, wow, that's really weird. You know, your family is very strange. And
Yeah.
you go, oh, what's strange? Because it's so normal to you. You just think,
Right.
oh, that's what you do in families. But
Mm-hmm.
so often it's helpful to get an external perspective, but essentially you draw a map of what is going on. So in
Mm.
the ANZ example, we started to map, what's head office, what are they, and it's not so much what they're doing. Yes, they're doing risk, they're doing HR, they're
Mm-hmm.
doing IT, but how are they taking up that
Yeah.
role? They're taking it up in a way that is, just in charge. Ah,
Mm-hmm.
right. So they see themselves as in charge. They see themselves as giving the instructions. And what about the branches? They just seem de-energized. They seem like victims. They're just waiting to be told what to do.
Mm.
Okay. And then what is the connectedness between those two parts of the organization? You literally draw it. You literally create hypotheses and connectedness between the parts. So it
Mm.
is a systemic lens, but in a very practical way, because I think often we've been told about systems thinking, and it seems so esoteric and so technical and so
Mm-hmm.
um, complex that it's
Yeah.
not practical. But actually, it can be very practical, and you can make it work in a very tangible way for you. So I would say the first thing is map the system, make it object, start to define roles and relatedness between the parts.
Mm. I I'm slightly terrified to map certain organizations that I've been in because I think it will be almost illegible trying to connect everything that happens.
Yeah.
Um, but this idea of the order taker pattern begs the question. What are some of the other patterns that show up in organizations that you work with?
Yeah, so many. And I give lots of examples in the book, and I also draw them. But another example that you might be interested in is when I was working at an infrastructure company and a newly appointed general manager was facing poor customer satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
And she was really struggling with this and saying, Siobhan, customer satisfaction rates are trending down. I've got to shift this because I'm newly appointed, but I've been in the role 6 months now and it's still trending down. I
Mm.
think we need new equipment. Our fleet of trucks and all of our equipment is way out of date. And I think customers are not happy with that. It's not
Mm.
helping us. And I said,
Yeah.
before you spend millions of dollars on a new fleet, let me go out and have a look at what's going on with this systemic lens, looking for
Yeah.
patterns. So the
Mm-hmm.
first of her projects I went to was where they were digging trenches to lay cables for internet for a rural town in Australia in a mining district. So I talked to the project manager and he said, we're behind. And I said, oh, why are you behind? He said, oh, and the client's not very happy, but we've encountered white quartz rock in this
Mm.
region.
Okay.
And it's just, we haven't got the equipment. We're waiting for the order to come in. And I said, well, didn't you realize when you put in the proposal, this was a mining area and there would be white quartz rock here that's hard to dig through and you would need jumbo drills? And he said, yeah, we probably should have, but we didn't, we just didn't plan for that. So this sort of behavior was going on many sites, not just on that site, which is what I call the reactive pattern.
Okay.
So the reactive pattern was the project managers were reactive thinkers. They weren't planning ahead. They weren't ordering the jumbo drills. The site managers were floundering because they didn't have the right equipment. So the rescuers were flown in. The firefighters were flown into the site to rescue the situation and dig faster. And the site managers were in role of the rescued ones. So you had reactive thinkers, you had the firefighting rescuers, and you had the rescued ones. And this pattern or agreement between the parts was we don't plan ahead. We react rather than plan ahead. And a whole suite or a whole group of firefighters were being lauded as the heroes. So in some ways, the pattern was serving the organization because everybody was saying, well, thank goodness for Jimmy. He came in and he dug the quartz rock and he saved the day. So that reactive pattern was running the organization. And once the general manager saw that pattern, she could intervene in a different way. It wouldn't be solved with a technical solution, which is to buy new equipment.
Right. There's a couple of things in there that jumped out at me, one of which is the idea that a pattern or a series of behaviors could persist because there are rewards being experienced for it, meaning in that case, it was the firefighters, being the hero. So there's no incentive on their part necessarily to want to shift the pattern. And even the folks who are doing the work of the initial digging and excavation, they might, in that case, think, well, we always figure out a way. I don't know, we bring in the firefighters if we need to. And there's nobody then who sees the full pattern who then can go, well, yeah, that works, quote unquote, meaning like you do eventually get the job done, but it's late, it's over budget, and our customer's unhappy. And here we go with, months and months and months of dissatisfaction from our customers. So, in that case, is it challenging to bring the full team along if they're experiencing at least not really feeling the brunt of the negative and maybe even getting some reward from the current pattern?
Yeah, pattern, it's a really great point because patterns exist for a reason. They are consciously or unconsciously created and they serve the system in some way.
Yeah.
So you've got to appreciate that they have worked for that ecosystem in some way in the past, but they may no longer be serving the system now.
Yeah.
So one of the first things that you do as a leader, as a manager who's trying to bring about change is what I call hold up the mirror to the system. You're holding up the mirror and you're saying, this is what's going on. And I draw this where I go, you've got the project managers in role of reactive thinkers. You've got the firefighters coming in to rescue the situation. And then you've got the site managers who are like in the burning building, the rescued ones, rescue me and I'll cope. So once they saw this pattern, it was like, oh my goodness, the general manager just said, this is happening everywhere, Siobhan. This is everywhere, not just here. But they were caught by it. They didn't see it. It's like the family example. You're in a family, you don't realize it's weird. You just think that's the way families operate. So with the reactive pattern, you see it. Once you see it, then the work of rewiring and reframing roles can begin. Reframing is a very powerful tool during change.
So we've got some of these patterns that create challenge in organizations, whether it's the order taker or the reactive, and I'm sure there's others in that mix.
Many more.
And you now get into the reframe. Are you reframing and creating a healthy pattern? I mean, is it still an acknowledgement that a pattern is needed, but now it's a better pattern? Is that what happens?
Yeah, so patterns in organizations I talk about the hive mind. The hive
Mm-hmm.
mind creates patterns, and patterns can be productive. So you can have patterns that are generative or positive or life-giving, and then you can have patterns that are destructive. They're not actually serving the ecosystem any longer.
Mm-hmm.
So the challenge is to rewire the organization from the dysfunctional to something that's going to be more functional for where the ecosystem wants to go to next.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with change, many of us have been taught to work at the individual level.
Yeah.
So we're trying to bring about change using tools and techniques that work in the interpersonal realm, but they
Mm-hmm.
don't work at the collective realm. And this is where reframing can happen, not just at an individual level, but at a group level. You can reframe the roles of groups and you can rewire how the whole ecosystem is functioning by doing this work.
And are there names for the resulted patterns in this case? Meaning, do I move from reactive to proactive?
Proactive,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I give both examples. I give many examples of the most common patterns that I've seen over the
Mm-hmm.
last few decades over working in 4 continents, and that's just two. But I always give both. So I give the reactive, and then the forward thinking pattern was what they implemented
Mm-hmm.
at the infrastructure company. So essentially, how they started to create a more forward thinking pattern was for each proposal, the GM implemented a steering committee of experts who would review each proposal and start to see the potential risks. So they would
Mm-hmm.
be the people saying, hang on, isn't that the gold mining district in
Right.
Victoria where they've got a lot of white quartz rock? I think we're
Mm-hmm.
going to need some jumbo drills.
Yeah.
Let's toss them into the proposal and make sure that when the project starts that the drills are there. So
Mm-hmm.
these experts began to see the potential risks and put in plans to mitigate those risks.
Mm-hmm.
So then the project managers stepped into more the role of the proactive ones. We didn't really need the firefighters anymore, so they sort of became redundant, and the site
Mm-hmm.
managers stepped into the role of the prepared ones. So you had proactive thinkers, more prepared site managers, and more forward thinking project managers, and
Mm-hmm.
starting to rewire and reward for that behavior. And within 6 months, the general manager was seeing an uptick in customer satisfaction. So the
Mm-hmm.
myth that change needs to take a really long time, when you
Yeah.
see the system, when you reframe the roles, when you start to rewire, change can happen almost immediately because people can step into a new role.
Mm. I certainly love the sound of that, and I think all of us, like you mentioned earlier, we've been in cases where change or restructuring or whatever has happened, and one, it takes a long time, so there's a long active period of disruption, and then when things supposedly kind of settle into place, they seem worse than they were
Yeah.
beforehand. So you end up wasting oftentimes several years creating the
Yes.
change, living in the change, and then dismantling the change over the course of 3 to 7
Yes.
years.
Yes.
How do you? I mean, I'm hearing a lot of like, okay, there's a lot of like really insightful, smart thinking around the kind of change that's needed to move from the patterns that are not working to the ones that are. The thing that I always wonder, and I think we've all experienced, is even if it's good change, it's so easy to slip back into old habits and old patterns because we're so wired for that. So when you talk about the rewiring, how do you do that in a way that the old wiring is forgotten enough that we don't revert back to it?
Yeah. And I think it's such a great series of thoughts there because, firstly, we are often putting in technical interventions in complex adaptive ecosystems, and we really need to be working much more adaptively. When we're
Mm-hmm.
wired for the technical or the linear or the mechanical, we
Mm-hmm.
think we just pull a lever and then implement a restructure. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to write a policy. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to put everybody through a sheep dip training process, and then the change is done. I can tick it
Mm.
off.
Yeah.
But when you're working more systemically and you realize that actually the metaphor is less like a machine, because we've been taught the organization is like a machine. So we just
Mm-hmm.
pull the lever or we oil the ratchet or we twist this gadget and it will happen. It's more like a beehive. It's more like a
Mm-hmm.
complex adaptive ecosystem. So
Yeah.
you must strengthen the emerging change. You can't just drop the change in and assume, well, I communicated it, so
Mm-hmm.
it must be happening. You
Yeah.
must work with the, that, oh, well, we launched it. Is
Mm-hmm.
it not done yet? You've got to work with that ecosystem over a period of time to nudge it. I talk about
Mm-hmm.
nudging the change, not smashing it with a big hammer, because
Mm-hmm.
that emerges a different pattern, which we could talk about, but nudging the ecosystem. And what I call the fourth step on the hive lens model. So I give people 4 steps in bringing about change in complex groups or
Mm-hmm.
human ecosystems. The fourth step is about
Mm.
strengthening the emerging change, and doing that in there are multiple ways of doing that.
Mm. I really like the metaphor or the analogy to an ecosystem versus the machine, because I think we're all bumping up against that when it feels like we're treating things like a machine. We either behave like that, meaning we pull the lever, we think it's done, and then we get all fired up when things don't work the way the machine should have worked. Um,
Yes.
and we often, or we're just feeling the effects of it, and it just becomes this, the machine gets reset, and within like days or weeks, it all gets gunked up because it wasn't really fixed. And oh, by the way, it's not really a machine. So in this
Yes.
ecosystem, and again, this comes back from your book and the hive mind at work, harnessing the power of group intelligence to create meaningful and lasting change. I love all of the words you use there because I think they're important. And I love how that it flows into the ecosystem idea. And what I'm wondering, you talk about the ecosystem that the bees create. How how does that analogy connect to the analogy of an organization? Can you help us kind of draw the connections between what you observed, as a child in the beehive, in Ireland, to what you see at workplaces that you're either in or working with now?
Yes, so we can learn a lot from the bees, but we're not
Mm-hmm.
the bees. Obviously, we're humans, so we're not the
Yeah.
same. We can learn from them. So if you take, I do talk about the 4 stages, and I give an
Mm-hmm.
example of how the bees walk up to each of these 4 stages in the hive lens. So the lens is stands for look beyond, is the L, E is experiment, N is nudge, and S is strengthen.
Mm-hmm.
So the bees look beyond, because the bees see when winter is approaching that they do not have enough supplies. The hive has grown, it's doubled in size, and the
Mm-hmm.
supplies they have won't be enough to make it through the cold, harsh winter. So they see patterns, and they decide to make the hard decision to 20,000 of them. They will split. The hive will split, and half of them, or about 20,000 bees sometimes, will go in search of a new home. So they will
Mm-hmm.
look beyond. They will look beyond their current circumstances, which is something in organizations we often fail to do.
Mm-hmm.
We don't see the reality. We don't take action. We keep sitting in the situation, even though we need to change.
Mm-hmm.
Then the second one is experiment. So the bees, before they settle on a new home, they send about 200 scouts out to, like real estate agents, to search for a new home.
Wow.
So these 200 scouts go out and they search in old barns and tree trunks and flower beds or wherever, and
Mm-hmm.
they come back with the information about which locations are best for the new home, and they share that in a waggle dance, a busy dance with the rest of the hive that settled on a tree branch near their
Mm-hmm.
original home. So they experiment
Mm-hmm.
before making a decision, because that's what you do in complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Then that's the E, then the N, the hive lens. The N is they nudge. So when they found the perfect location, and I talk about the fact it's on the edge of a wombat forest, they then nudge each other or headbutt each other gently to say, come on, it's time to move. We can't be waggling around anymore. We've got to make a move because we only have 3 days worth of food supplies and we've got to get to the new home or we're all going to die here on this tree branch. So they nudge each other, little headbutts. And then the last step is they strengthen the change. So they don't just get to the new location, which is a hollow branch on the edge of Wombat Forest. They don't just get there and sit around. They have to build a whole hive infrastructure. So they build the honeycomb inside the trees. They start to gather the nectar and forage in the nearby meadows. So they gather enough food so they can survive for the long, harsh winter months. So that's how they do change.
And so if I'm in an organization and I'm wanting to change and change effectively, one, I think, simply acknowledging that we're in a world where change is always happening and this needs to happen. So there's a mindset shift there that happens, and that maybe will encourage us to look beyond. Because I think, you mentioned that a lot of organizations aren't great at that, and I've certainly experienced that. So it feels like maybe if you acknowledge that we live in a changing world, and we're an ecosystem, a part of a larger ecosystem, which may be our industry, which is part of a larger ecosystem, which may be the economy, and I'm sure there's multiples. Like even that mindset shift suddenly goes, oh, okay. Even though I may feel a little more comfortable, staying in the hive I've always been in, or going to this new hive, but then just chilling out, this new location. Now I recognize the need to look beyond. And I think, like, in so many industries, so many businesses, there is that pull of the comfort and safety of the known. How do you help people, one, see that we're living in a very changing world, and I think people see it but don't want to acknowledge it sometimes, and then go, there's actually a really wonderful way to exist in this world, which includes these 4 steps. But that first one, the willingness to look beyond, do you find that it's challenging to help people actually get into that set? Is that hard for a lot of folks?
Yeah, it's a really interesting series of thoughts because I think many leaders have been taught that their role is as a delivery leader. So, for example, the company I work in, Dulux Group, it's a paint company. People could really see their role as, okay, we manufacture the paint, then we put the branding on the paint, and then we deliver the paint to the big box distributor, in this case, Bunnings. And that's my job. Okay, my job is to be a delivery manager, delivering the paint and doing that really well. And everybody has a great experience. But actually, the reframe is that this is an and we're often in multiple roles. We're in role of delivery leader and change leader often. And there might be other roles. I talk about the 4 key roles that you need to take up as a leader. But these are 2 of them. You need to be a delivery leader and you need to juggle these multiple roles. And one of the other roles that's often missing is change leader. Because in this environment of massive disruption, escalating change, we could go on and on about the changes that are happening. Leaders need to increasingly step into role of change leader. So often they don't even see that role. They just think it's my role to deliver the paint to the customer. So how can that reframe happen?
Yeah, and I can connect that to where the advertising world, where everybody has pretty set roles, whether you're one of the people creating the work or working with the client or developing the strategy. And I think there is comfort in that. I know what I do. There's a certain craft to it, and I understand how to do it. But at least, certainly in the leadership role, being like open and aware to the fact that there may be other things we need to do here, and we may need to rethink how we do certain things. And while that skill or craft is really useful and may continue to be in some contexts, other skills are necessary too if we want to truly evolve with the needs of our clients, as opposed to standing in the system that we think will work forever. That feels like a tension that we're often dealing with. And I wonder, like, okay, I'm looking beyond. Okay, I'm open to that. And then you talk about like the experiments, right? And what are experiments in this context? What might I, as a leader in an organization, be experimenting with? And what ultimately is the benefit of that experiment?
Yeah. And I will get to that, but I just want to reinforce your point about, let's say, marketers. Marketers have been taught how to be good marketers, and they can develop a launch plan for a new product. Finance managers have been taught how to create budgets, for example. Operations managers know how to do a production schedule. Engineers know how to design a bridge across a wide river, but ask these technical functional experts to bring about change in complex groups, and you normally draw blank because we haven't been given the map for that, which is part of the reason I wrote The Hive Mind at Work, is to start to help leaders and give them practical tools around how you can do this work. And one of the things, to your question about experiments, one of the things, going back to the ANZ Bank, that we did when we noticed the order taker pattern, we said, okay, we've got to redesign the operating model rather than just go to restructuring. We redesigned the operating model and we reframed the role of the branches and the head office. But this is a big change. So we're going to create a local area. We're going to appoint a local CEO. We're going to give them the responsibility for all the decisions in that local area. So, how they're going to serve customers, their opening times, how, the product set, etc. But that's a big risk. So why don't we just do it in a small area? Let's experiment in one area rather than all 700 branches going at once. And then we will find out what the reaction to that change is. So they did that experiment. The reaction was amazing. Customer satisfaction went up about 30%. So did employee satisfaction. A whole lot of metrics that we measured were ticked. So we decided we could roll that out across the whole network. So that's an example of an experiment where, in complex adaptive human ecosystems, you need to move and adjust. You need to experiment as you go, because you can often face unintended consequences.
Yeah, and I like that example, because I think almost every business can find a corollary, meaning we may not be distributed branches or franchises or whatever, but we may recognize that certain projects or certain work, the stakes are lower on it than others, so that you could go, okay, let's try something here. Let's try something in this group, which runs a lot of stuff that maybe doesn't get as much attention as some of the other work, to use the marketing world of, maybe they're products that don't get as much visibility, or their marketing campaigns that are very targeted or niche. And you can kind of go, okay, let's play here and continue to play, so that when we learn, we can then apply and cascade across the whole organization, which I think would have a pretty massive impact on so many companies that I know, because everybody wants to improve. Everybody wants to do things better, but we're so trapped in the work we're doing that we don't find the time, or don't think we have the ability to do it. So I like setting up little mini case studies almost that can then work. And I want to connect that back now to some of what I've been hearing from you also, which is the change that's in the world right now, the change that's affecting every business and every organization. Certainly feels like one good reason for developing this group intelligence. Are there more reasons why group intelligence, in your perspective, is sort of the emerging and important intelligence that we need to add to the mix?
Yeah, I think our old tools are necessary but not sufficient for the complexity we're facing today. So we're using IQ great for technical problem solving, but
Mm-hmm.
won't help you to bring about change in a team or a department or an organization. We're using EQ, which is very good interpersonally. So I
Mm-hmm.
understand you, you understand me, I understand your emotions, and I can manage my emotions. But again, it will not be sufficient if you're looking at a department and thinking, how am I going to bring about change here? So
Mm-hmm.
I think, in a sea of complexity, we are drowning.
Mm-hmm. And
And that's where group intelligence comes in to help you make sense of that complexity. Just like the ANZ Bank example, there was so much
mm-hmm.
complexity. It's often like a spider web.
Mm-hmm.
Leaders are caught and they're tangled in this web and they're thinking, oh, wow, look up there and I've got customer satisfaction issues. Look over there and I've got this thread of quality issues. Look over there, I've got escalating safety problems. And I look down there and I've got, staff engagement problems. Now, which
Mm-hmm.
thread do you pull? The more you pull these threads in this web, the more embedded you become often,
Mm-hmm.
because you're not seeing the complexity, you're really stuck. But it's not about pulling threads willy-nilly. It's
Right.
really about understanding the pattern in that web and how do you intervene in order to rewire the threads, not deal with the individual threads one at a time.
I like that metaphor as well. I can just picture being sort of trapped and stuck and trying to make sense of it. And it makes me
Yes.
wonder. So there's this ability to detect and then rewire and create new patterns. Is there a measurement? Like IQ gets measured, EQ has different tests that can kind of measure it. Is there a way to kind of assess where the GQ is within an organization and then give them the tools to try to elevate it?
Yeah, this is so new and
Mm-hmm.
so emergent. And I
Yeah.
have talked about the different elements of GQ, but what I'm imagining is that, we'll get to that point where we say, here are the elements, 12 elements or 7 elements of GQ, and this is a way of measuring them. But really, it's a very emergent field because
Mm-hmm.
you haven't heard of it. Nobody's heard about it. So I think we're at the beginning of, but there are systems thinkers who are talking about this, and my lens on it is make it practical, look at it from an insider perspective. Here are some
Mm-hmm.
stories, some case studies, some ways of thinking about it. But I hope that in the future that is where it will lead to, TJ. We will be able to measure this. It should be
I,
possible.
it seems like it's possible, and it seems like a nice, quick way for people to know what they're ready for and maybe where the right intervention level is and how
Yeah.
involved that intervention needs to be. And I think as much for it would be such a good addition to the conversation. I think there's
Yes.
something very sticky about IQ and EQ that you can measure it, and then it makes the
Yes.
concept more tangible and accessible. And
Yes.
and I feel like this concept warrants that because as you described it here as we're talking, it's definitely sinking in and it's making sense to me. Um, but I'm thinking about sort of widespread acceptance and implementation of this. Yeah, giving people just quick, easy ways to grab onto it and go, yeah, I want to know my GQ because yeah, it becomes obvious that like I need to know how to work as an organization or within teams within that organization. So yeah, I hope it
Yeah.
can be sorted through for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it would be relatively easy to do, and it's probably in my next book.
Hmm.
But it really is about can you firstly identify patterns in complexity? That would
Hmm.
be the first step. Do you step back? Do you see patterns? Do you see role? Do you see connectedness in complex ecosystems? The second would be, can you design interventions that can bring about change in
Mm.
groups,
Yeah.
that are not just technical? Just put them through training, write the policy,
Hmm.
restructure, design these interventions that really work. And then the third is, how good are you at implementing change in complex ecosystems that goes smoothly and without lots and lots of noise. People who do change, and everybody's gossiping and everybody's up in arms and everybody's at the water cooler and talking about how badly implemented it was and they knew nothing about it. That's low GQ.
Yeah.
So I think and the other thing with assessment is you might think you're great, but others may not see things the same way. So it would have to be a 360.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, again, been in those organizations and on both sides, where I thought things were going great, as a group or a team, and then you realize, oh, maybe not so great. And on the sort of reverse end, where you're very aware that things aren't going great, and then you bring it to somebody who goes, really? I thought we were really good at that. Which is, definitely a 360 look at that feels critical. I'm curious for you, is change something, does all this work you do on change at an organizational level, has it helped you personally deal with change? Or I know it's a different set of factors, but does it play a role in that for you?
It certainly has helped me to understand the steps I need to bring about in order to make change happen myself. But it doesn't mean that change is easy for me. Yeah. It's still hard. So you're often, but I know what I need to do, but whether I do it or not is another story.
Well, I think that is the story of many of our lives, right? We see it, but do we do it? But it certainly must be helpful to have some reference points that have come to you through your own work. I have a question for you from our previous guest that I'd love to pass on. So her name is Elaine Boyd, and she works in systems in a different way. She deals with sort of the systemic process of teams and organizations working on, helping people implement software that can help teams work better, that kind of thing. But one of the things she's been noticing is the role that cultural differences can play within a team or within an organization. So as you think about change management across sometimes large-scale organizations, how are you able to take some of those cultural factors into account to implement the work you're doing?
Yeah, and I think, again, it comes back to the 9 laws of group dynamics and not, tapping into multiple perspectives and not making assumptions about what certain groups might think. You really need to go into groups with an openness and an open-mindedness that allows each part of that ecosystem to express how they feel about this change or how they feel about what's being proposed. And you're often surprised. And sometimes those lenses are because of cultural difference, but don't make assumptions would be what I would say, and allow the group to find its voice and to say what the group needs to say and different parts need to say, because it may slow you down at the beginning. I say to leaders say, oh, I don't have time. We're on a time frame and the board is harassing me and the manager wants change and they want it fast. It's slowing me down, all these people having a view, but actually it will save you time on the back end. So take your time at the front end. It saves time at the back end.
Yeah. And I feel like that's another one of those things that sometimes I know, but I don't follow that advice. Like, I'm very aware of it, but I can appreciate that. And I think, something you said triggered a thought for me, which is if an organization develops or already has pretty strong group intelligence, is part of a representation of that might be the ability to implement change that not only listens and doesn't make assumptions about what people want, but then finds a way to implement and activate change that well, obviously no change works perfectly for everyone, but manages to optimize that. Because I imagine that's really tricky, right? Like, change is going to affect people. It's going to slow some people down for a minute, speed some others up. Is that part of it? Is part of the goal to sort of optimize the potential disparities there?
Yeah, I think so. I think you bring the system back to what connects the parts.
Hmm.
So what is it overarchingly? Because often we can get into this siloed mentality. Oh, well, that's my role. That's my role. That's what I'm being, that's what I'm being incented. But you've got to find that point of integration which connects them. So what is
Mm.
our overarching role? So
Yeah.
bringing it back to the ANZ Bank example, our overarching role for the two big parts, corporate and branches, is to serve the customer. So, reframing head office from order giver to enabler was
Hmm.
painful in some parts. It's, oh, well, I used to be in charge, but
Yeah.
actually, my reframed role makes sense in the context of what we're collectively trying to achieve. So you bring them
Hmm.
back to that hive mind. It's not about the individual bees, it's about their
Hmm.
role as super pollinators for the world. So that is an
Mm.
overarching purpose. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's often helpful,
And
PJ.
what I love about that and really everything you're talking about is we're, I think we're all very aware that we have some big problems to crack in the world. Massive problems, lots of problems, shifting problems, evolving problems.
Yes.
And we're also, I think, at least viscerally aware that our current systems and organizations are not quite suited
Yes.
or up to the task as currently organized. So what I see in the work you're doing beyond helping company A, company B, company C work better and make the experience better, and from a Desuckify Work perspective, give me, more joy and fulfillment from my work because I can see how I'm playing my role in the hive to help some bigger purpose that might satisfy me. You're also at a global level creating something that scales into solutions and thinking and a mindset that allows us to go after all these different challenges with a much greater chance of success. Is that motivating you as well as the
Yes.
the organizational side?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. I have said IQ and EQ are necessary, but not sufficient for the challenges we face today.
Mm-hmm.
They really won't get us to, we can't deal with the complexity that we're facing. And this is why we need to start developing a more systemic lens and our group intelligence to deal with
Mm-hmm.
those collective complex problems that we're facing.
I love that, and it gives me a little hope in the face of stuff that can drain hope from you. Right? You see the
Yes.
giant scale of things, and to realize there's an approach, there's a way of looking at this that we can do these things. So I appreciate that alone from what you do among all the other things. I'd love to give you a chance to ask our next guest a question. So her name is Asmara Kazmi, and she's a systems designer, and she founded a company called the Ops Room. And her sort of purpose through all of that is to unlock ease and joy through energy efficient systems design, which I think is a really neat kind of mission for the work she does. Do you have a question that I can share with her when I talk to her next week?
I think I would be asking, how would you implement the system with ease and with joy so it doesn't bring up resistance in that organization?
I think that's a great question. I'd love to hear her answer. Um, Another question I like to ask as we wrap up is if you could wave a magic wand and sort of fully desuckify the work world, what does that look like to you?
Oh, I think a workplace where people can bring their full potential and do their best work is really what's been my mission, trying to create workplaces where people can grow and perform and adapt and be their best selves.
Yeah, and I can see the role that what you're doing currently would have in that for sure. I think group intelligence feels like a nice way to help us be more aligned around the missions that matter to us. Another thing I always like to ask, a little sillier, a little more fun way to kind of wind down the show. I invite our guests to add a sound effect because I use a lot of sound effects in the intro and outro of the show. So if you're game, are you up for making a quick sound for us that we can weave into the show?
Sure. I mean, I'd like to click my fingers to desuckify work. So I'll just make a clicking sound, which is maybe, is that okay?
That's great. I love it. I want to add a sound just for you that could be fun to add into the mix, which is bzzz.
Oh, I love that sound. Oh, I love that one.
Yeah, I want to honor the bees a little bit, but I love the clicking. I mean, I think that is something we're all looking for, is those moments where we just it all clicks. And the last question I have for you, Siobhan, here is simply, how can people find you online and learn more about the wonderful work you're doing, the books you've been writing, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so the book, The Hive Mind at Work, is available on Amazon or your favorite online store or physical store. And best way to find me online, TJ, is on LinkedIn. So people can follow me, Siobhan McHale, and I post there regularly.
Awesome. Well, I will also add this to the show notes so people can get there as simply as possible. And I just want to say thank you, Siobhan. This was a wonderful conversation that has me thinking about a lot of new things, which is the best kind of conversation in my world.
And thank you, TJ. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Oh, I just realized I didn't record that, but that's okay. I'll figure it out. It's recording on my my other thing.
Oh, cool.
So thank you for that. I know you got to run. I'll make this all pulled together here in the next couple of weeks and typically launch like 3 weeks from yesterday is probably when this
Fantastic.
launch.
What a wonderful interview. I really enjoyed it. And you're such a pro. You're so, such a professional. Thank you so much, TJ. It was very accomplished.
Oh, I really appreciate that, Siobhan. Thank you. And we'll talk soon.
Talk soon. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the DesuckifyWork Podcast. And a huge thanks to Siobhan for bringing brilliant insight and bold thinking to the show. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, share, rate, review, subscribe, or consider going to the gym, doing the heaviest set of squats you can imagine, and screaming, "I'm desuckifying my glutes," with every torturous rep. You can follow Siobhan on LinkedIn and check out her book, The Hive Mind at Work, on Amazon. The buzz is pretty big with this one. Sorry, couldn't help myself. I also can't help myself telling you about my site and my Substack newsletter. Check them out if you can. I'm on a mission to make work suck less, and I'd love for you to join me. Want to make that desuckification happen ASAP? Let's set up a free half-hour coaching session. Bye, everyone.